What's up, golf friends? This is Jim Colton, and this is the Driven Golf Podcast. I am here with the super looper / super producer, Joseph K. What's going on, Joseph?
Hey, Jim. What's going on? Happy to be here.
You've had a busy week. You caddied in the Pro-Am over the TPC Byron Nelson. The tour's in town. That's pretty exciting. And then also you caddied for the one and only Andrew Lewis during his U.S. Open local qualifying.
Yeah, it was a busy week. I mean, it's hard to turn down an opportunity to caddy in something or a PGA Tour event when it's in your backyard. So always a good time to go get out there to the Byron Nelson. Got to caddy for Lucas Latimer. Shout out to him. And the pro in our group was Tom Whitney. So it was really fun to see him kind of plot his way around the golf course. He and his caddy, Austin, were really grinding out there. I know he didn't get the result that he wanted to, but I think that's in large part due to the fact that he probably made 150 feet of putts on Monday. So the putter may have cooled off a little bit, but yeah, it was a good event. Got to see another amateur, Chris Kim. It seems like every week we talk about one. So we kept our streak alive there as far as seeing some high level junior golf.
Another 16-year-old. So Chris Kim is from the UK. He won the British Boys Amateur last year and made the cut. And it's just phenomenal. And this is happening again this following week. TPC Myrtle Beach. Blades Brown, who's a sophomore in high school, is in the field, and there's no reason to think that he won't do equally well or even better. So this just seems like the new norm. This is really fascinating because we've got Brentley Romine on this episode 17. And speaking of amateur golf, like he extensively covers college golf and amateur golf for Golf Channel and NBC Sports. Also covers the pro game a bit. But he co-hosts a podcast, College Golf Talk, with Steve Burkowski, and they really do follow both the men's and women's season. And one of the really cool things I think about following the amateur game, and I know we've had a lot of discussions in the past around this, it's like you get familiarity with these names before they become household names. So I think about Ludwig Aberg. He really busted on the scene at the Ryder Cup, and again, he was in contention at the Masters. So he's really a household name at this point. But folks who follow college golf, they've known about Ludwig for years, like because he's really been one of the best golfers in the college game. And so that's one of the cool things that Brentley talked about a little bit, how it's a little bit of a niche kind of follow, like similar to golf course architecture, which I also nerd out on. But you sort of get this inside scoop on the next wave of stars well before they're sort of become public knowledge. And so you can sort of be like telling your friends about, you need to check out this guy when they're in the field, or like when Ludwig was in the Ryder Cup, like this guy's legit. And when they do break through, it's kind of like, hey, I told you so. I've been telling you about this guy for a couple of years. So I think that's one of the appeals, is that you get to see the next wave of stars, and you sort of feel like, hey, I'm sort of on the cool inside crowd because I know I'm in on this guy well before others are.
Yeah, that's great. And as someone who's fairly new to the junior golf world and amateur golf world, it's a really cool episode to get into the kind of background of how you actually consume college golf. I mean, you always send me leaderboards and websites and places to track these tournaments, and it's like, man, some of these are really clunky and hard to navigate. So you guys get into that a little bit in this episode, so it's good to get some background on that.
Yeah, and the other cool thing is, like, this is really kind of Brentley's Super Bowl season. So the women's regionals are starting this week, the men's regional the following week, and towards the end of the month, both the men's and women are wrapping up with the NCAA finals, which are at a new site, La Costa, in Southern California. And I believe you checked out a podcast this week what Brentley had with Coach John Fields, where he talked about that whole movement and what could potentially be a big growth opportunity for college golf, both on the men's and women's side.
Yeah, it's a fascinating backstory. So excited to get into it.
Yeah. So in angle of attack, real quick, you mentioned you caddied for Andrew. It is qualifier season, which is awesome. We got U.S. Open local sectional starting in a couple weeks, and we're seeing these names come across the websites and the leaderboards. A couple folks I just wanted to shout out that I know that Mac McClure, who we met at the U.S. Amateur last year.
Yeah.
He won the local qualifying at Cantini Golf Links, which was in Wheaton, Illinois, my old hometown. And Luke and I spent hours like battling each other and trying to beat each other's brains out at Cantini. So shout out to Mac. And then our friend Nick Gross shot a 63 in his local qualifying in Pennsylvania earlier this week. And, he's moving on to sectional. So that's one of the nice things is, again, like scrolling the leaderboards, seeing these familiar faces and rooting for these amateurs. Maybe we see a couple of them in the U.S. Open at Pinehurst.
Yeah, that's great. I hope so too. I know, Andrew, if you're listening, which I know you are, we didn't get the result that we wanted to, but it was a lot of fun. I know we got to film some content out there, and I think our playing partners had some fun as well. So, yeah, it's that time of year.
Yeah. So, in Angle Attack, we did talk about sort of this qualifier mindset, which is how do you attack a qualifier? It is a different problem set than a tournament, so it requires a slightly different strategy, slightly different mindset. And one of the things Andrew did admit during that is like you sort of know your fate, about 6 or 7 holes in. So I think he kind of realized what his fate was in this most recent qualifier, and you guys decided to have some fun and film some content for his YouTube channel. So with that, this is episode 17 with Brentley Romine. Hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks, Joseph. Brentley Romine, welcome to the Driven Golf Podcast. How's it going?
You know what? It's going great. It's one of my favorite times of the year, and it's a lot going on, but glad to be on the other end of a podcast and not having to produce and stuff.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on. I know you just had your 100th episode of College Golf Talk with Steve Burkowski.
It could be 101 or 102, but the math that our back end says it's 100. But I think it's actually maybe 101, but that's kind of on brand for our podcast, that we don't actually know what the 100th episode is. But we're going to roll with it and say that, we just recorded our 100th episode, which is pretty cool.
I honestly, as someone who follows amateur golf and college golf, I really think of the year in really two halves. The times when College Golf Talk is in session and the times where College Golf Talk is not in session. So I'm always excited when I see your stuff drop. And I am honestly like super impressed by your your Rolodex, I think, in terms of context you have within the coaching community and also the player community amongst these top amateurs. Like you get a lot of great intel, and it seems like you pull these nuggets out of, I don't know, where are you? Your notebook must be huge because you just pull these nuggets of factoids and, history and stuff that happens sort of behind the scenes. So I think that only probably comes through having these really strong relationships.
Yeah. And actually back in 2016, I woke up one morning. I remember it vividly too. I was at the US Amateur in 2016. So that's the one that Curtis Luck beat Brad Dalkey in the final. And I woke up one morning kind of early that week, and all of my like text messages and everything were all numbers, like not names. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? And I lost all of my numbers from about 2011 through 2016. So I've had to build it back up. Wow. And then, I feel like the old school reporters have actual notebooks, like Burko has actual notebooks. I have a lot of stuff on my laptop, and my laptop died like just out of nowhere in December. And I'm like, well, is this stuff saved to the cloud? And they're like, well, no, it's actually just on your laptop. You had to sign in here. And I'm like, oh, great. So I actually lost like a ton of information on my laptop about 4 months ago too. So, it's just, luckily some of it's in my brain still. I'm sure as I get up there in age, I'll probably forget a little bit of it, but we're good so far. But yeah, so a little bit of behind the scenes adversity for you, but I try my best.
Yeah, no, it's great, and just if folks aren't aware, College Golf Talk really covers the college golf scene. Starts up a little before the season starts up, really follows the fall season, and take a little bit of break, and then it follows the spring season. Now we're really ramping up. We just had really quote unquote selection Sunday for college golf, even though it's on Wednesday, right? Where the regional pairings got announced. I know you were also on Golf Channel and spent time, discussing those selections. and just the rapport with your co-host Steve Burkowski is fantastic. You know, he covers
Thank you.
golf for Golf Channel, and you know, I think college golf has really sort of grown. I think with the televised events and the great job that Golf Channel does, and I think there's really a real interest. I think both in the women's and men's amateur side. It's been really cool.
Yeah, that's the plan, right? Is to try to get more of these events on TV and, some of the bigger events too, hopefully down the road. But yeah, I mean, I've noticed kind of our traffic wise has gotten a little bit bigger as we've kept doing it. So 100 episodes in, I think we like where we're at. And I know Golf Channel as a whole, we really value college golf. And obviously me personally, it's kind of my favorite aspect of the game, the amateur game, college game. I mean, even the junior game, it's just, when you are covering all levels, it's kind of hard. It wasn't like back in the day when I was at Golf Week before Golf Channel, from 2011 till 2018. And I had a lot more, I was basically like just the junior beat starting out. So I was covering the junior players, AJGA, Rolex tournament champions down at PGA National, that kind of stuff. And I think it's really beneficial. I always try to encourage kind of my peers in the industry that may just cover the PGA Tour to go cover like some amateur stuff, or at least if you're not going to an event, like try to cover it just by working the phones or, cover it from home. Just kind of make connections and establish relationships with these younger players. So when they do break out and get on the PGA Tour, like they're comfortable. And I think in a way too, I've always kind of viewed what I've done, what I do as a little bit of practice for like the young golfer. Because if you're 16, 17, 18 years old, like if no one's covering you and you don't have any media training and no experience, like getting interviewed and all this stuff, once you get out on the PGA Tour, like you're going to stink at it. So I think it's really good for, kids and college golfers to get the practice, getting interviewed, things like that. So I enjoy telling the stories, but I think it is a little bit of media training too.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because I guess 2011, this must have been like Jordan Spieth, like when he was a senior, right, in high school. And have had a front seat of seeing these elite junior, elite amateur players, when they were younger, and not only just forming the relationships, but seeing the development. So I imagine there's players now that you're just like, you knew this was going to happen, or maybe you're slightly surprised that this was going to happen, or for maybe some players you're surprised it didn't happen, but like you've seen the journey, you've seen the relationships, you've probably seen the parents, the swing coaches, the college coaches, and just like, I think you do a great job of telling some of the human interest side of the story, like people that have overcome, adversity and have broken through. And I think the one thing that I think we're going to talk about Spikemark here in a bit, because it has been a crazy college year for sure.
My favorite subject, Spikemark.
But I will say, as somebody who follows college golf, you're really, for the most part, following live leaderboards, right? You're following scorecards. You're imagining what's going on behind the scenes, because a lot of these shots you're never going to see live, right? You might see highlights on their Instagram feeds or whatever. But I think one of the things that you do a great job of is help telling those stories. Like they say, like there's no pictures on a scorecard. There's no pictures on a live leaderboard. So, as a fan of college golf, like this is how we consume the product, right? You consume it on these live leaderboards. But I think with the storytelling that you're doing and, following some of these accounts in social media, like you're able to sort of weave the story or sort of imagine what the story might be behind that, as you get to know some of the personalities, some of the players, and, some of their ups and downs, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting that you kind of bring up, that aspect of the sport is, kind of how it's consumed, and it's so different. Like, what's the Byron Nelson's going on right now on the PGA Tour, and I could flip on tomorrow morning and watch, featured groups, and especially like during the majors too. Like you can see basically every shot that the pros hit. And you're right, like other than a handful of college golf events, like there's no way to actually know what's happening unless you go to it or you read something about it. And so I wish that there was more coverage. I wish that there was 10 of me to be able to cover a lot more. I think there's 500, 600 some odd Division One men's and women's college golf teams, and even more in the lower divisions. And I mean, we're just scratching the surface as far as that. But it's funny too, because college golf, you know, goes back, I don't know, like dozens and dozens and dozens of years, but the records are pretty, other than recently, like they're pretty shoddy. And so that's why, like the account on Twitter, College Golf Book, and a couple other people like Lance Ringler at Golf Week, like there's really kind of this effort to maybe do some of that. Like there's a couple SIDs too, at different colleges around the country that are trying to help establish some sort of record book before the 1990s, because you go to the NCAA men's record book and you basically know who won these championships, but you don't have full leaderboards, all that stuff. So it's relatively incomplete, and that's why every time someone shoots something, or a team shoots 25, 30, 45 under par, it's always like believed to be the record, because we don't actually know for sure if it was done back in like 1945 or 1955 or whatever. We don't really know that. But
yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember Wen Yi Ding shot some astronomically low number, I think first event in the spring, or was it when his first couple events that he first came on campus, right? And people were like, well, we think it's his record because it's really, really low. We can't imagine anybody having shot better than this, right?
Well, yeah, and like back-to-back events, I think he was something like, I'm wanting to say he was, I don't know, maybe, well, he was 17 under par for his first tournament when he finished runner-up at the NIT, and then he won the Armour Ari, and he was 27 under, so what, 44 under through his first two events. Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable saying that was a record, but we always have to qualify it if we don't know for sure. Like, believed to be the first freshman to shoot 44 under through his first two stroke play events of his career. But yeah, that's just kind of what we deal with. But I think that's what makes college golf kind of cool, because like it's kind of like other like niches in this game, like the architecture niche and certain things like that. Like, it's not a lot of people are really like into it. I wish there were more, but if you are into it, like you kind of feel like you're a part of some like exclusive club, because it's just kind of the nerdy thing to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you mentioned the change between the game and like decades ago. How has the game changed, I think, from the time that you first started, sort of that 2011 era to now?
Well, I think certainly the kind of the self-exposure of these players, like just with social media and Instagram getting really big and TikTok, and you add NIL to that and the transfer portal, even though transfers were still, I mean, when I was starting, and granted, I'm only 33, I've only been doing this since 2011. Actually, interesting enough, Jordan Spieth won the very first tournament in college that I covered at Iowa in 2011, won by like 7 shots, and Texas won going away, and that was the season that they ended up going on and winning the NCAA championship at Riviera, beating Alabama and Justin Thomas. But I think it really is kind of that self-marketing, wrinkle, how it's evolved since when I first got out there, and just a player's ability to kind of increase their brand without really needing someone like me. And I think it's really important too. I think it's added a lot of negative as well. I think there's certainly there's probably some studies out there that show that social media isn't really a very positive thing, at least mentally. But certainly from an exposure standpoint, like from these players and these different programs and stuff that kind of build a following online. And you mentioned you can't watch it on TV. Well, you can follow it on social media and like what's going on and things like that. So I think that's how everything's changed. I remember, speaking of that 2012 NCAAs, I remember a couple of years ago, I did this big oral history on that championship, and I must have did 30 or 35 interviews and had hours and hours and hours of transcription and all that. But I remember going back through like Twitter in like 2012, and it was, I mean, it was very bare. Like, you could barely find anything. I was trying to find some stuff of Bill Murray at the Players Dinner, early in the week, and I found like one grainy photo from like the corner of the ballroom from like Cal's men's golf account, and that was all that there was. Now, I mean, these players have, I mean, heck, some of them who are signed with agencies with NIL deals have people doing their like own graphics and hype reels, and some of the bigger programs have a guy who exclusively travels just to do like content like that. And then obviously what Back of the Range is doing, Ben Adelberg, and kind of what he brings to the sport. I think that's where things have changed a lot. I don't know too much about the NIL. I really don't know how much these players are getting paid. I do know that some of them are getting paid a decent amount, especially through these collectives at the bigger teams, and it's certainly maybe amplified or increased the number of guys going from mid majors up and transferring, getting in the portal and going to a big school. I think over the last few years, you're seeing a little bit more of that than I necessarily remember. But I mean, heck, you ask like Lance Ringler or someone how it's changed since when they've started covering the sport. It's probably a heck of a lot more, but
Yeah,
it's still
for sure.
it still has changed a lot in a little over a decade.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing that you guys talk about quite a bit on your program is PGA Tour U. And I think prior to PGA Tour U, these players would get done with school and it's like, best of luck, right? And they don't have status anywhere and they're trying to get sponsors exemptions and they're trying to make their way. And probably for someone like you, someone could really be off the grid for a while and then they finally, they have a breakthrough and they pop back on the tour. I think the great thing about PGA Tour U is now giving these pathways outside of, right after college. And you've seen what these players have been able to do. Obviously Ludwig and Adrian Dumont Deschart from Illinois, like winning right away. And obviously Nick Dunlap. I mean, I think the one thing that's changed, and maybe it's a result of what you said with these sort of brands that these players, is they're much more polished, it seems like, at an earlier age, and they're much like ready to go. It seems like, even before they're finishing college, it's just truly astounding.
Yeah, and you're right. It was kind of a roll of the dice, even like when Jordan Spieth turned pro and Brooks Koepka, like both of those guys missed that second stage of Q school, and so this has kind of ensured, it's kind of put college golf more in line with a college basketball or a college football, where like the top draft pick, like Zion Williamson or Caleb Williams, like that they're going straight from college to the pros, big contract, things like that. Ludwig getting the tour card, Gordon Sargent getting the tour card through PGA Tour U, accelerated next summer. He's obviously coming back for one more year. That's kind of like that guaranteed like rookie deal for like the number one pick. And I think, that's, I didn't even really think about that. But that's been a huge boon to the sport as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if that program keeps expanding, because if anything, like Nick Dunlap winning and Ludwig coming out and making the Ryder Cup team and playing well in the Masters a few weeks ago, like it shows that these guys are ready. And you know what? It's not like Ludwig was winning every single time out in college. Like there was guys that were beating him fairly consistently out there, whether it's Michael Thorbjornsen or Crystal Lamprecht or those guys. So I think there's like, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe 2 or 3 guys got their PGA Tour card down the line, because I think that's kind of that cutoff where I think every year you have 2 or 3 like studs, and then a handful, a dozen guys who could probably play pretty well on the Korn Ferry Tour that first year.
Yeah, I mean, you saw, Preston Stout, right? He went straight from Big 12s, right? And like the next day teed off the
how
Korn
about
Ferry
that?
event and was in contention. It's crazy.
Kids.
These kids are really
I'd
good.
be sore. That's a lot of golf in a row.
No, so that's awesome. And I think it's, these are guys that I've been following for years. My son plays junior golf and, he's obviously, we're following Miles Russell and the great work that he's done. Some of these junior golfers are starting to get NIL deals and it's opening up opportunities for them to play in events that probably wouldn't have been available to junior golfers. They're very, very rare. I do want to pivot a little bit because like I mentioned earlier, this golf season in particular has been pretty interesting. Got off to a bumpy start in the fall. My father-in-law was here in town. My son played in the high school state championship, and they were back here. And my father-in-law, God bless him, he asked this very innocent question. He said, "How do you even follow college golf?" and I had to tell him, like, you got to go to golfstat.com.
Yeah.
Like, that's the way that you consume the product. Like, it's just like following, the live leaderboards on junior events that I send you. It's basically the same way. And he spent an hour like scrolling through GolfStat, looking at all these tournaments, like, oh, they got a tournament in so and so, and he was just amazed by how many tournaments there were. But like GolfStat, it kind of went away right in the fall. There maybe some under the table, underhanded. I don't know what's going on. You've covered it and have investigated it pretty heavily. But basically, the NCAA, like, they switched the contract away, which existed with GolfStat for decades.
Yeah.
Like
to over 30 years.
Yeah, to a new provider, and it didn't get off to a great start. You want to maybe fill in the gaps there?
Yeah, we'll do kind of the abridged version because we could be here for hours. I think the story that I wrote last fall was like 3,000 or 4,000 words, and it really couldn't have been any less because there was just that much to kind of go over. But basically, GolfStat kind of been this long-standing scoring and rankings provider. So they did rankings as well. Those were traditionally the rankings that they would use to go determine the NCAA regional fields. They would go straight down the ranking, and that would be what it is. And Golf Week also did a ranking that was very similar, kind of more of a head-to-head. If anyone's familiar with Jeff Sagarin, like, he does college basketball and NFL and NBA, like any kind of team rankings like he does. So Sagarin does Golf Weeks, and GolfStat was similar, with a little bit different. But Mark Lash was a longtime founder of GolfStat, and he passed away from ALS a handful of years ago. And then his son Brian also, he had taken over, and then he passed away. So GolfStat, they were still moving along. I mean, Mark Cassell, who was there, was doing a great job, as was the rest of their team. And they found out last summer or last spring, actually, either during or shortly after the NCAA championship, that the NCAA was going with this new company called Spikemark, which was created by Derek Freeman, who was the former UCLA coach who retired a year before that. And everyone at that point was kind of like, all right, well, this looks pretty cool. Like, Derek kind of rolled out a PowerPoint, kind of showed everyone what it would look like. And the Spikemark website would have, everything that GolfStat had, but it would be a little bit better because GolfStat, it was kind of antiquated. Like, you couldn't go, like, you go on ESPN.com, like Major League Baseball standings, click on a team, see their entire schedule, see their results, stats, things like that. Like, Spikemark promised to do all that. Plus, he had every logo on there. So he must have spent like 2 weeks, which actually we know that he himself spent like 2 or 3 weeks just uploading logos. But he promised, like, hey, I have this new innovative thing. We're going to have live scoring. It's going to be great. Well, the season comes around, and the very first events in late August, they're having issues. There's bugs. The website crashes. They claim a cyber attack. Well, long story short, come to find out, Spikemark was kind of more like the Fire Festival of college golf. So it was this big over-promise, under-deliver mightily. Nothing worked. Derek had farmed out the development, didn't have golf people working on it. Really was trying to do something. I honestly believe he was trying to do something good. He just didn't know what he was getting into, and he tried to do it as cheaply as possible, and it just backfired big time. So eventually the NCAA brought in, well, I think Derek reached out to this company called Clipped, who had been working with some teams, Wake Forest women, Georgia Tech men, kind of this stats analysis, data analysis type company. And they started helping Derek out with Spikemark. And eventually the contract ended up getting handed over to Clipped by the convention in December. Mark Brody's rankings were rolled out in January. points-based ranking, which is more similar to like the OWGR. It really heavily weights wins over everything else compared to the older rankings. And not a lot of people are fans, and I still don't think a lot of people are big fans of it. But yeah, it's just been kind of this mess, and it's been unfortunate because, as we talked about earlier, like college golf is now on TV, and these players are starting to be household names, like even like playing in PGA Tour events and majors and all this stuff. And the sport was really like barreling upward, and then it just hits this huge, you know, spike mark, and basically just I'm not going to say like explodes, but I mean it definitely, I think, set the game back a little bit, and it really jaded a lot of coaches and players and people who follow the game, because it's just like seriously, like we had a decent thing in golf stat. Like it was kind of like, again, 30 years, like golf stat was college golf. It was almost like losing a member of your family. But, golf stat hasn't gone anywhere so far. They laid off everyone. They were about to close up shop, and then the Spikemark stuff happened, and they turned back on the lights, and they've been doing just the live scoring. They haven't done the rankings or anything like that. But I think at some point, Clipped is working on their own live scoring service and things like that. I think eventually, GolfStat will, I think eventually this new Clip site, which is now called Scoreboard, I think that eventually that will be kind of what Spikemark initially promised. And then GolfStat will, at that point, I think it might go away. But, I think credit to GolfStat for kind of sticking around and at least giving us something, and giving these tournaments and coaches and stuff something to at least house live scoring on for at least this season. But it's just been a mess, and I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff. I've tried to put it like out of my mind now, because it's been 4 or 5 months since I've really written anything about it since the convention. So I'm sure I missed some good details, but the story's still online. If you search my name and Spikemark, it'll probably come up. It's a pretty interesting read. It has a lot of good anecdotal stories of coaches and their tournaments not working.
I think the one interesting detail is that Coach Freeman was on sort of the selection committee. He was like part of the group that decided not to renew the GolfStat contract.
Yeah, right? And you mentioned earlier, like, backroom dealings, things like that. I know there's been a lot of talk about that. I haven't discovered anything that would lend itself to that. Plus, at the same time, like, we're talking about college golf scores and stuff. There's not a lot of money there's not a lot of money in that. So it's not like these people are in the back room, like getting rich, like making these deals, things like that. I think it's one of those things where the committee, like people at the NCAA, like they saw GolfStat and they looked at it as kind of this old system, even though it worked, and they kind of wanted something better. And Derek was like, well, I'll do something. So he had this idea. He worked on it for a couple years behind the scenes, and he failed massively. And I really think the NCAA, they obviously made a mistake. Like, they went with something that wasn't proven. They looked at a bunch of PowerPoint slides and a quick run through by Derek that was done on the back end without thousands and thousands of people like trying to log on to your website when it's actually live. And they kind of dropped the ball too. Like, they didn't properly vet this, and what can you do now? But I don't think it was anything necessarily super shady. I know people will also point to the fact that Greg Grost, who's the head of the GCAA, the Golf Coaches Association of America, he was Derek's high school or college coach. So there was a relationship there, but at the same time, like, it's college golf scores. Like, no one's getting super rich off of this. And I think it was just one of those things that they knew Derek, obviously, and they knew that Derek has been involved with college golf for a long time, and he played it and he coached and he won a national championship at UCLA, and he has this shiny new toy that looks really cool, and it didn't have a place to put the batteries in. And so that's just kind of all there is to it. But Derek, he has his wine business, so as long as he doesn't get back into the golf scoring and rankings sphere, he can go make wine and kind of get on with his life.
Well, I will say, because like we said earlier, like this is the way that college golf fans consume the product. And like you said, it sort of set it back. Like there was all this momentum, all this positive momentum around these players, these up and coming players, and tracking them. And then when this happened, like you said, GolfStat was going to go away. And it became this sort of like, I would like sort of stumble on, oh, wait, I went to University of Illinois, like, oh, Illinois is playing in a tournament? I had no idea, right? Because like, and it got to the point, like, if it wasn't on GolfStat, then it didn't happen in my mind.
Especially early, because they weren't sure what to do. And a lot of them thought GolfStat was like nail in the coffin, like gone. And so you had, I think I counted, it was like 6 or 7 different scoring providers. So it was like Golf Genius, Birdie Fire came back, GolfStat, people were using GolfStat, people were using Blue Golf. I mean, just like every platform, like someone was using it. And the best was actually the Transylvania coach, who was doing like actual Sharpie, like live scoring and getting players to like text him scores. And he was doing like updates on Twitter, and it was so great. Obviously not sustainable to do, but definitely as a little novelty thing to look back in 10 years and look back on that and have all those Sharpie poster boards, to keep as sort of mementos of a crazy year in college golf.
Yeah. I guess related to the rankings, the one thing I wanted to verify with you is, I know at one point the NCAA said, okay, well, going into the regionals or whatever, we're going to allow the selection committee to use Golf Week, use GolfStat, and also obviously the scoreboard ranking, the Brody ranking. But I think I just scanned it quickly today. It seems like it was pretty much chalk relative to the scoreboard ranking. So have we verified like that's basically what happened?
Yeah, the women. So we meet with the committee shortly before our selection show. So last week we met with the women's committee. Yesterday we met with the men's committee, and the women's committee said business as usual. Like we went straight down the rankings. I think the biggest issue is that update did come out earlier this spring that would allow the committees to use other resources. But one of the big problems is that the Golf Week Sagarin rankings, Lance Ringler is doing them, but they're not published. So the NCAA was not able to get a hold of those. The committees were not able to get a hold of those. So they couldn't use that. And then at that point, I think they looked back and, you have a few coaches and some athletic directors. This isn't like basketball where you could turn on the TV or go back and look at film and watch these teams, right? Like we're going back to like what we talked about earlier. Like you're just looking at scores, and how are 6 or 7 people in a room who haven't seen some of these teams hit a golf shot this year, how are they going to decide like, oh, we're going to move this team out, even though the rankings say this, and we're going to move, this team in? I just don't think anyone felt comfortable doing that. The men's committee did say they looked at a lot of things like adjusted scoring average and kind of took out like 50, the teams ranked 50 through 80 and kind of looked at them closer. But I do think like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to go and look at the fact that it's just straight down the rankings. So clearly no one felt comfortable really straying from what Brody says, even though there are a lot of critics of Brody's ranking, which I actually think was the right call, right? I mean, you can't, like I said, you can't have 6 or 7 people who haven't seen half these teams play and couldn't tell you more than a player or two on the team making decisions, taking teams in and out. So I think Brody's ranking team-wise, everyone's divisor is very similar. I think for the most part, it was pretty accurate. I know there were probably maybe a half dozen teams, maybe a little fewer, who would have been in on the Golf Week rankings inside the number. But again, that's 4 or 5 teams. And who's to say like the GolfStat and Golf Week ranking was like super accurate? So Yeah, I think it's what we have. I think we need to embrace it and just kind of do what we've done. I don't mind going straight off the rankings.
I think the one thing that I saw quite a bit in the spring, and I'm sure this happens every year, it would have happened in the other ranking systems as well. But given the Brody system, it looks at score differentials. And what you saw is when a team would host their host event, they would win by 20, 25 strokes.
Yeah, that's
and
the
it would
key,
be
right?
worth more. Like Vandy got more points winning their home event by however many shots than they did winning the Ben Hogan with like the most stacked field in the fall, right? So you have sort of this, and probably not every program hosts their event, right? So you might see this movement as like, hey, if this is going to be the system, we need that one sort of cupcake event where we're going to blast the field by a bunch because we're playing on our home course.
Yeah, and it's very hard to drop in average points rankings. Like with the official world golf ranking, someone like Justin Thomas, who was in the top 10 a couple of years ago, and then he slumps, he didn't really drop. He kind of slowly dropped, right? That's kind of what we see in Brody's ranking. You can make big jumps, and then you just slowly drop. And so I think it's also like not even how much you beat the second place team by, but it's how much you're beating like the sixth and seventh place team by, and it's how much that last place team is behind. Like if you go and look at some tournaments, there'll be a team that finishes last by a significant margin, like just totally gets boat raced by the second to last team, and I think that has an impact too. So I think people might argue like that's how it should be, right? But at the same time, I've gotten so used to the head-to-head type ranking that Golf Week and GolfStat did. And Golf Week, you kind of knew going into a tournament, like, all right, I'm Illinois and I'm playing Indiana. And I can look at our power ratings on the Sagarin rankings and do the math and be like, all right, like we just have to beat Indiana by 8 shots or something like that, or 7 shots over 54 holes, and that's good for us.
Right.
So again, like I'm not a like super rankings expert, but I do prefer the old way. I just think now like it's just this is what we have, and it's not crazy. It's not like we have teams that shouldn't be like you can look at the 50th ranked team in the country, San Diego, and you're like, yeah, they're probably around there, like give or take 6 or 7 spots each way. Like they're probably
and I would say
team.
at the top. I mean, it's basically in this season. It seems like there's really been the race is pretty wide open with 4 teams at the top, right? Auburn,
it's kind of
North Carolina, Vanderbilt, Arizona State. I would say those are the 4 top teams in the.
Yeah, they've separated themselves, and then you have like 3 teams: Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Florida State, and then there's another drop off to everyone else. So, yeah, it's certainly interesting.
I know that you and Burko like covered each of the regionals and you did your picks going into that, so I won't necessarily cover that ground. But if you do think that there's sort of a big 4 this year, if you had to take a guess, who might be crashing that party in terms of the semifinals?
Yeah, I really like Florida State. Maybe I could see Ole Miss as well. I just don't think. I mean, I think I saw somewhere today. Ole Miss is a 2 seed in Stanford. That's the highest seed that program's ever had. So I think there will be a little bit of unknown for them, and it's not like they've played well at regionals too. Like I think they've only gotten through twice in the last 7 or 9 tries, something like that. So there could be a little bit of inexperience there. But Florida State, I mean, they got to the semifinals a year ago, and they basically brought everybody back. And I think the reason why they're not ranked better is because the fall was kind of a mess for them just in terms of getting everyone in the lineup. You had Jack Bigham coming back from the Walker Cup, so he missed the first event. Then you had him and Tyler Weaver going to the World Amateur Team Championships, and Frederick Ketchup was also there. And then Frederick Ketchup was, I think he was still kind of getting over that back injury that really plagued him. He didn't play like the first 3 events of the fall. And so you had all these players, and then Brett Roberts gets hurt and misses a few events. So they haven't really been at full strength until now. And Cole Anderson's not even playing that well. Like, he didn't play all 3 rounds of the ACC championship. But I do think, they have a few weeks to kind of rest, get everyone rested up and a little bit healthier. And this is going to be, as long as they're somewhat close to full strength, I think Florida State could absolutely beat any team in the country, especially in match play. Like, they could beat Auburn, they could beat Vanderbilt. Like, would they be favored against them? Probably not, but they're well coached. Like, Trey Jones has been around the block a few times. Like, he'll get the guys ready. And I think too, when you experience like the type of heartbreak that they did last year with Ricky Castillo from Florida, like their bitter rival, making a putt and extra holes and storming the green, and then you got to walk all the way back down the 10th hole, and it's like 110 degrees outside, and you're just exhausted, and then you just get on a plane. Granted, it's a private jet, but you just get on a plane and have to fly all the way back across the country. Like, you have a lot of time to really, like, that like image just gets like seared, and it just replays over and over and over again. And it's probably still replaying over and over and over again. So I really like Florida State just in terms of bouncing back from that moment. And they also have the talent to do it. Like, Luke Clanton has had an incredible spring. He's won 3 times. Yeah. Also a great interview, by the way. Like, we had him on the podcast like maybe like a month and a half ago now. Like, he is like, he's one of my favorite golfers. Like, he gets it. Like, he can talk, he can tell stories. Like, he's a good player. He's like the complete package. So any NIL companies looking to throw some NIL at someone, look at Luke Clanton from Florida State. I won't take any commission off it either.
Yeah, you mentioned, like, I mentioned these human interest stories that you bring to the fold. Like, any other sort of rooting interest? Obviously, you're just covering the event, but like any folks that you're pulling for because you just know the backstory and what they've gone through, and hopefully like peaking just at the right time.
Yeah, I think Michael Thorbjornsen kind of comes to mind, at least in terms of the studs. This is a player who we've seen contend in a PGA Tour event. Like, he's played U.S. Opens, and he's won the Western Am, and he's competing right now for a PGA Tour card via PGA Tour U. So we're going to see him very soon on the big stage. But the guy missed all of the fall with a stress fracture in his back. He also had that minor surgery to get some bone spurs removed from his ankle as well. So that could be a rooting interest just in terms of the guy.
He had to miss the Walker Cup too.
And he missed the USAM last year, and he was really. I think it's unfortunate because you always want your senior year like to be able to go out and even like the USAM, like to be able to know that you're playing a USAM and it's your last one, and being able to enjoy it as that, because the previous USAM before that, he's playing and he's probably thinking like, yeah, I got one more, and then all of a sudden he doesn't. So, and he's not going to get to play in a Walker Cup. So I think all that was like really crushing, and I'm sure it was super hard on him. And so, that's a guy who, you can really root for, because he's a great kid too. I'm scrolling through these individual rankings. Ian Gilligan, obviously from Florida, the transfer from Long Beach State. He's a cancer survivor. Had battled cancer kind of late in high school before getting to college. So he's someone to certainly root for on that front. I think as a team, maybe at East Tennessee State, like a Cinderella mid-major. Their head coach, Jake Amos, was a part of that Augusta State team in 2010. He was the 6th guy. He didn't play in the championship, but he was on that team, and they won back-to-back tournaments or back-to-back NCAA championships, like as Augusta State, as like a true like Cinderella mid-major. And so that was kind of, that's a great moment in this sport. Maybe East Tennessee State can do that. They certainly have the horses at the top. Like, I was just talking on the pod earlier today on College Golf Talk, and even on TV, like we had Jake Amos on, and like Mats Egge's the real deal. Like, he's from Norway. He transferred in from UC Riverside, I believe it was, school over in California kind of early on, and he's been with the Bucks the last handful of years, and he's really taken off. Like, there's not many guys that have a better or have had a more consistent year than him. So they're a mid-major to root for. I think another SoCon team, obviously Chattanooga was the feel-good story last year in Blaine Woodruff's first year as head coach. Obviously the tragedy with him and his wife losing their child a few days before the due date. But the good news is, they've announced they're pregnant again. They're expecting in July, so they're having a baby boy. So that's great news for them. And the Mocs they're going to have to go west to California for the NCAA regionals. But I mean, again, like they're a gritty team. Like, they're tough. Like, they got a lot of talent, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them back. So that's another kind of rooting interest. I'm sure there's so many stories, right? And there's so many stories that I haven't even touched on, or I might not even know. But those are just some at the top of maybe teams that that we see getting to the NCAA championship.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat in 110-degree heat. That's more than likely not going to be happening at La Costa this year. So the other storyline,
I hope not. I think it might be the day after tomorrow or something like that. Might be apocalypse if we get that.
Yeah. So the other storyline this year in college golf is we're switching the championship venue from Greyhawk to the Omni La Costa Resort in Southern California. And I think you just had Coach John Fields, a University of Texas coach, on for an interview earlier this week. And I thought it was really interesting. I knew that he was involved, and Texas was the host school, but it seemed like he was really like a force of nature in terms of making this happen with some very aspirational goals in terms of what this could potentially do for college golf longer term. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think John Fields, and, knowing him for 11, 12, 13 years now, he's definitely has the personality. Like, he's the type of person who, when he gets an idea, like, he wants to go after it and see it through. Like, it's not just, oh yeah, that's a cool idea, I might get to it. Like, he is like all out. Like, he is flying to San Diego all the time. He's on the phone all the time, and he still has to coach a team, and his team's pretty good. And he's had to do a lot of coaching this year because, frankly, they've been a little immature and they're young, and he's had to do some things. He's had to take their cell phones away.
I heard,
kind of like he's their parent. So he's been busy on that front, but at the same time, like he is, like, as you said, he's the driving force behind this. I mean, obviously he has some help, but I think the dream is for him to make college golf kind of like college baseball and have this revenue sharing partnership between what will be the College World Golf Foundation or Championship Foundation and the NCAA, kind of like the College World Series Foundation, and to be, to have college golf's Omaha be, the road to Omni La Costa. And I thought it was really interesting, just in terms of when he was saying he was talking to Jeff Shackelford about the idea back in like 20. He always says 2018 Walker Cup, by the way. I like so badly want to correct him and say, John, it was actually the 2017 Walker Cup at LACC, but yeah, so it was 2017, and he's talking with Shaq about it, and he's like, well, what about La Costa? And Shaq's like, well, it's outdated. It's all this stuff, just kind
of. That's
a
pretty good Shackelford.
Yeah, he's like, oh, yeah. So just kind of bemoan stuff, but I love Shaq, but it's like, well, what if Gil does it? And lo and behold, like, he gets Gil Hanse to redesign La Costa. And I think it's really, I haven't seen it. I'm really excited to get out there. But I know it's going to be an upgrade over Greyhawk, because I thought Greyhawk it had a good identity, especially down the stretch with the finishing holes. I thought you had a nice cadence of holes with like the par 3 on 16, and then the drivable 17 and 18, which is the really tough par 4 for the guys, a par 5 for the women. I thought that made for really good theater. I just didn't like how that golf course took driver out of these guys' hands. Which
golf fans, we want to see Gordon Sargent hit driver
exactly
12 times around, right?
I mean, the best players in college golf, a lot of them are the best drivers of the golf ball in college golf, and I think part of that is just because of distance and how premium off the tee play and really ball striking in general is. I think that La Costa is going to be a lot more like the U.S. Open that we saw last year at LACC, where you have, wider fairways, but it's imperative to be on the right part of them. And instead of having to hack out from the desert and making an automatic bogey, maybe you're in the fairway or like just in the rough, but you're on the wrong side, but you're still tempted to go at a green, and then you get yourself in a lot of trouble and make a double or a triple. And so I think you'll have a lot more variance. Like Gordon Sargent and those guys, Christo, will be able to use the driver a lot more. I thought it was funny. I remember, I think I've told this one before, but the morning of the men's final last year, it was me and Burko. We were sitting down having coffee, talking with Bruce Hepler. It's the quote unquote breakfast with Burko with both coaches before the final. So I said on that, and Bruce was talking about how Christo has felt like he's in a cage all week. Like he's like, it's like claustrophobic. He's surrounded by rattlesnakes and cacti and desert. And it's just, and plus it's 110 degrees. It's just very, I didn't think it let the best golfers in the country shine as well as a course should. And I hope, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, La Costa's going to be awesome, because we haven't seen it yet. But I do think like most of what Gil Hance puts his hands on, like it normally works out pretty good. So I'm fairly optimistic that La Costa is going to be a really, really great test. In the finishing, I think it's going to have a good identity, kind of like Greyhawk did. I mean, you have a short par 4, you have a par 3 that resembles a 12th at Augusta National. So I think there's a lot of variance kind of down the stretch too, and it's going to be interesting. I don't think it's necessarily going to favor the West Coast teams necessarily. I mean, San Diego, like I'm sure we'll probably get like a little bit of wind maybe. It's going to be around 75, 80 degrees as a high every day. The grass, I'm not sure exactly what grasses, the greens and fairways and all that stuff are, but if no one can play the course, the only teams that are going to benefit are the programs that get there year after year, which is how it should be. Like you should, if you have a senior-laden team that is playing their 4th NCAA championship, like that should be an advantage. And I think you lose that when you start bouncing around and going to campus courses and courses like Eugene Country Club that are an actual advantage to a team like Oregon. So I actually really am optimistic and very excited about kind of John Field's idea to have the NCAA golf championships at La Costa in like perpetuity.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, it checks all the boxes in terms of like what you would hope for in terms of the integrity of crowning a national champion, right? A deserving national champion, having a championship course. I think the one thing that's maybe, I think Coach Fields mentioned is the fact that Gil Hance had built the Olympic course was designed to host the best women, the best men in the world, basically in the same, time span. And this is basically the same thing that's happening here. Like that's not an easy thing to pull off necessarily. So, and I think this sort of theme that we've been talking about is just like the potential of college golf and really having an identity similar to college baseball. It's like when you start seeing the College World Series playoffs, like the stuff, the regionals and stuff leading up to it, like you start to get excited. Like you start to see them on ESPN and you start to watch those games and you get to know the players. And obviously when it's in Omaha, it's a huge deal. That may be the only, 6 weeks that folks consume the sport, but I think you're going to have this run up. So there might be more interest in the regionals. There might be a regional, nearby in your town. You might actually want to go there. A quick plug. If you have an opportunity to go to a college golf event, especially with the best teams in the country, like my wife and I went to the one in Fort Worth this year. There's nobody there, and you get to see basically the future stars of the game. It's like you can walk anywhere you want, right? And it's free, right? It's absolutely amazing. But yeah, I would encourage folks, especially with the regionals coming up, like
especially a regional. That would be. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely stressful. So you might get your if you crinkle a chip bag or kind of move while a player's hitting a putt, like you might get your head bit off. But because tensions are definitely high. Yeah. But you know what? That's like you were talking about that. like my like pie in the sky dream for college golf, at least from a television perspective, is to get these regionals on TV. I know
That would be
it would
awesome.
be like logistically, it would be an absolute mammoth of a task, and it would be very expensive and probably too expensive for any sane person to really do all 6 sites. But like it would be so cool to just have like imagine like watching like, YouTube TV and having like a 6 box up there, or at least a 4 box. I don't even know if they can really do a 6 box. Um, I'm sure they could, but like a 4 box and you have like 4 regionals going on. That would be so cool.
So the other thing related to just the product of college golf and the championship is the fact that it's match play, right? And I think that's sort of the thing that's helped bring college golf into the forefront with like just general interest and just the excitement of it. Like last week, I watched the SEC championships were televised on the SEC network, and really you've got 8 of the top however many teams were in the 8 match play in that, and you had Vanderbilt and Auburn in the final, which could very well be a preview of the NCAA championship itself. But I think the one interesting thing about match play, you just have the vagaries of match play, but when it's the 5-on-5 and there's no ties, these matches, they just swing. I think the closest thing that I can relate it to, people obviously follow the Ryder Cup. When you have it's sort of like the afternoon session, like the morning 4-ball, where you have the 4 matches, and there's only a finite set of outcomes that can happen. But if one match swings, it could go from like, oh, this was looking great for us, to all of a sudden you're not feeling so great about it. You know what I mean? And in the case of the colleges, it's like, even in the SEC, so I was watching it last week, like, oh, this team's in the driver's seat, this team's in the driver's seat, and one guy flips a match because he bombs a 60-foot putt or chips in from off the green, and it's like, oh crap, it's like completely flipped. Like one match can just completely flip the match and completely flip the outcome in terms of who advances and who ends up winning the championship. And I think that's one of, it's teams can fall short of match play and teams could bow out early. Maybe the best team doesn't win necessarily, but from an excitement standpoint and from a fan following standpoint, it's like you have these like mini Ryder Cups each day through the match play.
Yeah, and there's certainly 2 trains of thought, right? There's the people who think that the championship should identify like absolutely the best team all season, which if you want to do that, like you play 72 holes of stroke play. But at the same time, like you might have a runaway victory and it's boring, like especially from a television product. So the NCAA basketball tournament doesn't always crown the best team the entire year, or even the best like 10 teams. Like there's been years where, I mean, look at last year, like FAU, they came out of nowhere. They think they were 8 or 9 seeds, something like that, and they made it all the way to the final. So, and like UConn was a 3 seed that year, so they weren't even one of the best. Actually, they might have been like a 5 seed even. So they weren't even the best like 16 teams in the country. So I think match play from from an excitement standpoint, and it's easy to understand too, right? Because it's like, all right, this person is 1 up, like they're a hole up. They win the next hole, they're even again. I think more people can understand that. Again, it's like
like the 5 count 4 stuff when you're following, like we're watching the ones in the fall.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than like, this guy just made a triple, but remember he's the drop scorer. Well, it's like, what? Like, they don't do that on the PGA Tour. So yeah, match play is just so exciting. In that Vanderbilt Auburn match, it was pretty crazy. Like all but one guy on the golf course that day, like of the 10 players who were competing, like only one guy was ranked outside the top 50 of the world amateur golf ranking. Like these were like studs. Like Vanderbilt has all 5 guys in the top 25 in the world, including the number 2 amateur, who's really not playing that well right now. He really is the number 1 amateur in the world. And then like there's 6 guys, like Wells Williams, like 56 in the world, something like that. So it's just crazy how good these 2 teams are. And it's really going to be fun. Like we talked about earlier, who could spoil the party? Like, I don't know if I want anyone to spoil the party as far as the semis. Like if we could get Vandy ASU and then North Carolina Auburn, and then have 2 of those teams win and play each other, like that's going to be really cool. And it's going to be, the time slot on TV on the East Coast. And like the only bad thing about the West Coast championships is when we're done with TV and like I'm done with like the news show after that, like I still got to go and write. So by that time, everyone's sleeping on the East Coast. But I think in a way, it's actually kind of good because I'll just take my time. I'll go get dinner, go get like an In-N-Out, something like that. That's kind of been my game plan the last few years at Greyhawk. And then I'll be like right until like 3 a.m. And it'll just be a morning read. Like people will wake up on Thursday morning and, you know, hopefully read what I have to say. So I guess it's a disadvantage, but at the same time, it's an advantage because I have all night to write at that point.
That's funny. One thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up. So you guys allude to this on the podcast, and obviously, like you're covering the sport, you're trying to be impartial as possible. But on the pod, like you're putting yourself out there. You're picking teams you think are going to perform well, like you just did it in the episode today.
It backfires sometimes for sure.
Yeah, and you know these are competitive coaches. They are competitive, you know, high level athletes. I think of the Michael Jordan meme where he would just like pull any even like perceived slight as like motivation.
Yeah,
that sort of bulletin board material. But do you get blowback? I mean, it's probably just in a friendly matter in terms of like, you know, you guys overlooked us or whatever, like you didn't believe in us, but that ends up being something that leads the team to, you know, to rally around that.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and I don't know if you're trying to lead me into giving this answer or not, but a couple years ago, Oklahoma, I do the preseason rankings. I've done them for the last 4 or 5 years, and I really spend a lot of time on them. I call, you know, I'm calling coaches from late July through mid-August and asking them everything about their team, like who's gone, who's back, like what do you think, anything I should know, and then I compile these rankings. And a couple of years ago, I ranked Oklahoma as the 14th best team in the country. They were losing some good players. And like I think that was the year that they had lost like Quade Cummins and a couple of those guys. And basically, they were bringing in Chris Gotterup from Rutgers, which he had a good year at Rutgers, but no one knew much about Chris Gotterup.
Mm-hmm.
And they still had Logan McAllister. And I think they lost Brightwell from like the year before. So they like, and Garrett Reband. So like they lost a lot of talent and no one knew anything about Gotterup. And at the time, Logan McAllister was kind of inconsistent. He had won a couple college tournaments, but there were like stretches where he would just not be in the lineup. Like he wouldn't qualify. And I thought, you know, maybe they would be the 14th ranked team in the country. Well, they started winning and they won like almost every tournament in the fall. They were ranked number 1. And every single time they'd win, they'd throw up that hashtag 14. And it was just like kind of this like back and forth that we had the entire year. And I remember once they got eliminated, I think they might've fallen in the semis that year. But even the quarters. But I remember Gotterup saying like that was fun because he won the Haskins Award that year. And he was just like, I enjoyed the like banter back and forth the entire year. So I don't know how much like this actually like pisses players and coaches off. I think they know that like it's coverage, like it's giving the sport exposure. In college football, people are making predictions all the time. And in college basketball, people do their brackets. And if anyone takes that personally, then that's kind of on them. But I don't think anyone really does.
Yeah,
I think it's just fun to do. Like it's fun to pick. Like who wants to just go and spend a whole podcast just talking about teams and then not actually like going out and picking them. Like everyone wants to pick stuff. Like people love, like it's just competitive too. Like it's pretty cool to be like, oh man, I picked all 5 teams out of like 3 of the regionals. It's awesome. Like it's just cool.
All right. Well, first of all, if anybody knows Coach Hibble looks like a very intimidating individual. Probably not somebody you'd want to be on the bad side. But I would have to believe that he enjoyed you doing that in order for him to have the motivation and that thing to motivate his team.
So I'll give you a little something that I haven't told anyone publicly.
Right.
But so the funny thing was, well, first Coach Hibble also called me out on live television after they won Meridell about how I keep underrating them and overlooking them. So that was like totally fun. He totally like put me in like a body bag. And that was super fun. But so, I mentioned the preseason rankings and kind of the work I do beforehand and calling coaches. So before, not this season, but before last season, I was talking to him and I'm like, hey, like, I think I'm going to rank you guys a lot higher this year, like maybe 9th or 10th or something like that, because, you guys proved me wrong. Like, you made me look pretty stupid last year. And he goes, you know what would be hilarious if you rank us 14th again. And so I ranked them 14th again, and I haven't told anyone else that, but yeah, so it was kind of funny. It was just one of those things, like he saw, like, I mean, it was probably a small part, like just a little bit of extra motivation. Yeah. I don't want to give myself too much credit. But it was just funny. He's like, you know what? That would be freaking hilarious if you ranked us 14th again. Like that. He's like, I won't say anything to my team. Like, just do it. And it was so funny. And I mean, it wasn't that funny, but for me, it was.
All right. So you say you don't mind getting put out there. Who's your pick?
To win it all?
To win it all.
Like, I feel like I've made like 3 or 4 different picks. I'm going to say Vanderbilt. My wife will probably get mad at me. She's an Auburn grad. They've looked really good. I think I've been on record saying that, like, I wouldn't be surprised if they won. They're obviously the number 1 team in the country, so that's not really going out on a limb. But I just feel like, as Burke always says, like Vanderbilt, they're like built to win now. Same with like North Carolina. They got a lot of seniors on the team. I know Gordon Sargent's coming back now. Maybe that takes a little bit of pressure off him, but I know that they want to win. And, I talk about Florida State and kind of what happened with them last year. Like, Vanderbilt had a very similar kind of ending. Like, they didn't get as far, but they like completely like bowed out way before anyone thought. Like, they completely
they didn't make
choked.
it to match play, right?
No, they didn't. I think they finished I think they tied for like 12th or tied for 13th. And that final 9 holes on that last day of stroke play, it was just like, it was so hot. It was the afternoon. They were finishing on the front 9. It was just like it almost felt kind of like a death march. And it was a very similar feeling to Texas in 2021. Like, they missed the 54 hole cut. They were finishing on the back 9. Like, it was just, no one wanted to be there. They were embarrassing themselves. And they came back the next year with the 3 amigos and won the whole thing. So I think Vanderbilt could follow that path. We mentioned the fact that La Costa, even though Gordon Sargent won an individual title at Greyhawk, I think La Costa sets up even better for him. I mean, he was a low am at LACC. So that, I think that bodes well. So Vanderbilt's my pick. I think that's too chalk, but I would say Vanderbilt's my pick. And if we're going like not chalk pick, like kind of trendy pick, maybe value because I've seen like people can actually bet on the NCAA men's championship, which is kind of strange to me.
I don't know about that.
I really like Florida State, like we talked about earlier. Just I think you could probably get good value on them. And then super, super deep sleeper, like, don't count out Texas. Like, they're trending at the right time. They just won the Big 12 title for the first time since 2017, which is hard to believe with that program. And they don't have cell phones. So, well, I mean, they have cell phones, but who knows? Maybe some of them just never got them back. Maybe Coach Fields hasn't given them back yet.
If Texas does win, you're going to see a widespread growth of cell phone bans across Division I golf.
That would be counterintuitive to everything we talked about earlier with increasing your brand and all that. But I mean, I really believe that there was something to that. Like, cell phones just totally just suck all of the energy out of you. And I spend way too much time on mine, but I have an excuse, like mine's for work kind of. So, but yeah, I think social media is kind of a little bit of a disease. And it's no surprise that Texas, when they don't have their cell phones and they can actually like practice and actually spend time and build team camaraderie with their faces not in their screens, like, it's no surprise that they're playing much better golf. And so they're my deep, deep sleeper. So that's like kind of giving you a favorite, but covering bases and giving you 3 favorites.
Okay. All right. I'm interested to see how Stanford does, because like they were way outside under the 500 rule, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another one
Yeah.
too. Like you could get great value for them too, probably, right? Because I was looking at it, they're probably more like if you just do their average points from the spring since Thor's been back, they're like the 17th or 18th ranked team in the country. And if you throw out Thor's first event, I think they're like maybe 11th or 12th. So, I mean, that's not a bad pick either.
Yeah, you had Carl Phillips won the Pac-12, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this has been awesome. One thing I wanted to pivot, because this episode is going to drop next Tuesday. So the Tuesday before Mother's Day. And one interesting thing I wanted to talk to you about is I think everybody loves their mom.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have a very, very special relationship.
Man, you've been doing your research
with your mom. Could you talk about this? Wasn't a Mother's Day gift. This, I think, was a Christmas gift. But I think I wanted to let listeners know kind of this, because like moms like, you know, they selflessly love their kids in all ways, big and small. And there's really like no way I could ever repay my mom for all the things that she's done for me. But I think you have a perfect example in terms of an opportunity to repay your mom. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say too many nice things about my mom. No, I love my mom. We definitely have a great relationship. Yeah. I mean, a little bit of background, like my mom, single parent. I'm an only child, so obviously we were really close. She was diagnosed with lupus when she was like 18 or 19. So didn't go to college, didn't really, have a normal, kind of period like in your 20s that most people did. And so had me at 27, I think. And then when I was in first grade, so maybe 6 or 7, she had her first kidney transplant. And then when you get a kidney from a cadaver, they only last, I think they're supposed to last like 10 years. And I think she got 18 out of hers. So it was just one of those things, like 2014, she was on the list for a new kidney. Like it wasn't necessarily like dire, like she wasn't like suffering like health-wise too much. But it was just one of those things, like her insurance changed with her work. So she had to like switch hospitals, and it was just kind of hectic. So I just kind of said, well, what if I donate one of mine? So we had it done in Gainesville at Shands, which is kind of, I went to UCF for college, but I grew up a huge Florida Gator fan. So it was kind of cool that kind of lined up like to where that's where we had it. In December of 2014, we got it done, and she's been doing great. And I was hitting golf balls like 6 weeks later, and not well, but at least I have an excuse now, right? But yeah, it's one of those things that I don't talk about too much, because when people always say, "Oh man, that's such a great thing," I always think, well, like who wouldn't do that?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. Like I just felt like that's just the right thing to do. And I mean, I did it because I love my mom, but I also did it because like to me there was just no other choice. So but yeah, I mean, it's a neat little thing that we always have. And I every time my mom's mad at me now, I always say, well, you can't be too mad at me. Like I gave you one of my kidneys. So but no, she's great, and she's a grandmother now, so that's like her favorite thing ever. She has a new favorite person in the world besides me. But yeah, it's a cool story. And gosh, it's hard to believe it's been it's gonna be 10 years this year. But yeah, I'm feeling good. My mom's feeling good, and
that's awesome.
Thanks for asking. It's good to talk about that. I haven't talked about that in a while.
No, that's great. I mean, I think it's I know that you shared it. You talked about it in one of your columns, and yeah. So I just wanted to mention that, especially it's Mother's Day. And look, like this podcast exists a lot for like junior golfers and and parents trying to develop in the game. And I will say, like, I know moms do all sorts of things for their kids that often are taken for granted, but so moms or kids out there to listen to this, thank your mom, hug your mom for all the little things they do to help in your golf journey. My mom got me into golf, actually. Like I started playing golf by whacking a right-handed mallet. I'm left-handed, a right-handed mallet putter around a soccer field. And my mom went to the pawn shop and bought like $10 golf clubs and like a bowling bag full of golf balls for like 10 or 15 bucks. And my life has changed completely, all because of that thing that my mom did to support something that it looked like I was having fun doing. So just happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And it's awesome that you have that great connection with your mom.
Yeah. Happy Mother's Day to my mom, Paula, and my wife, Paige. So since we're doing Mother's Day, congratulations. You're a Mother's Day podcast.
No, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking. This is like a super busy time for you, just like connecting with all the coaches and if folks start watching the regionals and paying attention to the championship finals at La Costa, and let's help the game grow. Let's help college golf grow and help these support these junior and amateur players develop and grow through the game. And I appreciate you telling those stories, Brentley.
Yeah, no problem. If I donate any other organs, I'll let you know, and we can come back on and talk about it. But no, I mean, all seriousness, like if people are listening to this podcast, I'm sure they're huge like fans of college golf. But I always say, like, talk to your friends who really don't follow college golf, but they love golf and they love college sports. I have friends who went to Florida State or went to Florida or wherever. I'm like, hey, like Florida State is playing in the NCAA championship and in the semifinals, and all of a sudden there you go. And then you have a fan. So once we get the scoreboard.com up and really running with one-stop shop for everything, then we can really take off. But yeah, no, appreciate you so much thinking of me and wanting to have me on the pod, and hopefully we can do it again. If you need a co-host sometime, we can always make that work. But you have my number now, and the line's always open.
All right, Andrew Lewis, welcome back to the Angle of Attack with Andrew Lewis. How's it going, man?
Good, Jeff. Everything's good.
Hey, man, we're meeting on kind of a special night. This is the eve of your U.S. Open local qualifier. So by the time this airs, you will have finished that qualifier, hopefully advanced to sectional. But we can maybe go both.
See.
We can maybe go both ways. You have the option here. You can either throw your caddy Joseph under the bus, or you can praise him for the job that he did in helping you qualify. So maybe we record both and we can edit one out, or you can just pick which one you want to go.
Given that he hasn't seen the course, I don't know if he's going to be like pulling me across the finish line, but maybe he will. I might. Yeah, that's right. He does. I don't have a rangefinder, so he's going to have to be there. I do have a yardage book. Plug StrackaLine. I do have a yardage book. My son played there a couple of times. I was like, you know what? I'll just get a yardage book too. That can't hurt.
Yeah.
So
did you use the code DRIVEN and got 20% off?
I did. Yes, I definitely did.
All right. Awesome.
I try out for the U.S. Open. I don't try out every year. I like to play the U.S. Open qualifier because it's before like my competitive season starts, and it's like a fairly easy rep to get in because it's close. It's a course I've played. But this year I haven't exactly prepped for it, maybe the same as I have in years past. But I did get a little practice in today. I've been very busy, with all the kids and my YouTube content. So really trying to branch out. But it'll be fun tomorrow. The reason I like to play qualifiers is, one, it doesn't, and to a degree, like it's not like a real tournament. It's kind of like a free rep in my brain. And it is a little bit different than like playing like a normal tournament, which I know we were going to talk a little bit about, like what is a qualifier mindset. But they are really fun. Like I encourage people, like if you haven't played a qualifier of any kind, like it is fun. And you kind of know your fate after like 6 or 7 holes, which is different than, a 54 hole event or a 36 hole event. Like you can turn it around. There's no turning it around if you're like 4 over through 7. I don't think I'm going to be, shooting 8 under the last 11. So
yeah. So this is really interesting, and I wanted to explore this because a couple of things I want to pull on is we talked about this in tournament selection way back in episode 4 or 5, where we really see these USGA qualifiers as an opportunity to stretch, right? There's no rankings involved. They're going to have better players there. It's really going to require you to be at your best that day to have really any chance of getting through. Even if you're one of the better players, like you got to show up and have a good round that day to make it through. And it's a way it can sort of reveal stuff, like, and you might find yourself in the pressure cooker. So I think it's like you said, a very low stakes, a high potential reward. You know, people aren't expecting you to play in the U.S. Open, so no one's going to hold it against you if you don't make it.
If they are, I would love to meet them. I would love to meet the person that thinks. Actually, someone today said, "Oh, am I going to see you on TV?" I was like, "Only if I'm coaching somebody."
Yeah, so I would, and even like Charlie Woods, you know, he tried to qualify and it was his first stab at it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Like people were making judgment based on his score, and that's not really the point. It might set him up for better success down the road. Maybe, you know, a U.S. Junior qualifier where he'll have a better shot. He'll be that much better prepared. I used to always try to get my son in qualifiers, like probably like a year before he was truly ready. And I would always say, like, next time won't be the first time.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, hey, let's get the shock out of the system when it's very low stakes and it's very probably low likelihood that you're going to make it through. And then next year when your game is ready, like you could feel like, hey, I've gotten the nerves out of the way. Like, and now it's time to just show up and perform, and to take some of that. It sort of demystifies some of that you may be elevating sort of the other players or thinking like it's going to be pressure or whatever. It takes a lot of that mystery out of it.
Yeah, the nerves are, I don't know about that. The nerves are still there. I'm nervous right now for tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, I think when you haven't done something before, like Cameron's doing his first US Junior qualifier, like he probably has no idea what to expect. Most of the time when you get done with something like that, like it's not as big of a deal as we kind of made it into our head. And you'll probably see people that you play regularly against, like, oh, okay, I saw so-and-so. Like, it's really not that big of a deal, but we as players like tend to elevate this stuff. But on the other hand, you are playing, like, I think it is important to mention, like, it is a stretch thing. Like tomorrow, there will be PGA Tour level players. I know for a fact there's like some really, really good Division I level players there. And so it does give you kind of like a measuring stick for like where your game's at. And there will be guys that are going to shoot some incredibly low scores. So if you can keep up with them, like that is a really, really good measuring stick for, like, even if like coaches look at those, coaches for sure look at those. So they're good to get in. I will say on the scoring thing, like Charlie shooting 81, that doesn't mean Charlie shoots 81. Like when you're in a qualifier, sometimes when you're a little bit outside the number, you start hitting shots that you probably wouldn't normally intend to. So I for sure have seen that play out with myself and other people, where you just start, you know, trying to go for things to a degree, because, you know, shooting, for example, if I shoot 72 tomorrow, that's not going to do anything. Where normally in a tournament like 72, that'd be great. I'd be happy with that. But finishing 15th tomorrow is not going to have much value.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So most golfers by definition are going to be long shots going into this. So what is the qualifier mindset going into a qualifier, knowing that you need to have basically everything clicking in order to even have a chance? And how does that differ versus maybe a normal kind of 54 or 72 hole tournament mindset?
I think the thing I think about when you say something like that is, like, I think about Scheffler. And if Scheffler had to just playing qualifiers all the time, like his rate of winning wouldn't be as much, because he's rarely the first round leader. Like, I think he was the first round leader maybe at Augusta, but then the next week at RBC, he wasn't the first round leader. So it makes me think that people, like more people have a chance. Like the best players, the reason they're the best players is they're going to beat you over time. They're going to beat you over 54 or 72 holes. So there's some freedom in that if I play a good round, I can kind of beat anybody, because I don't have to I don't have to keep up with them for such a long time. I think the difference in like playing a regular round of golf, like a competitive round of golf versus a qualifier, is that you're just highly aware of where you are relative to the number that you've kind of put in your head. Like everybody going to qualifier kind of says, like, I think I need to be around this number. And you're just constantly kind of adjusting your game plan on the fly to a degree, to where you might go in with a game plan, but kind of like Tyson said, like once you're punched in the face, like things change a little bit. And you can't be very patient, because if you're through 7 holes and you're 1 or 2 over and you know you have to get to 3 or 4, like you just have to kind of start like putting, you know, the pedal down. And so you might start hitting driver a little bit more. And there is nothing, I would argue, there's nothing wrong with that, because when you start making those decisions, you might pull off those shots in that one setting. If you had to hit that shot 4 times, the likelihood is you shouldn't hit it. But if you're having to hit it 1 time, let's say that it's a hole that's really, really tight and you shouldn't hit driver. But if you can pull off driver in that setting, it's worth half a shot versus hitting like 4-iron. So I think at some point, if you know that you're like outside the number, you just start making some of those decisions. Probably not every shot. And that's kind of how you can kind of get back into the qualifier. Or if you were in a tournament and you know that you have 47 holes left, like there's just no need to necessarily, I don't want to use the word panic, but like start adjusting your game plan. So that's kind of how I see qualifiers. I would say most of the time it backfires when people start like getting overly aggressive, but that's not always the case. Again, I'm not making it through the qualifiers, but I'm sure some guys that are shooting, a guy the other day shot 11 under in a qualifier, he probably doesn't do that regularly, but he's probably like going for things a little bit more. But that same strategy isn't as great over like 4 days, probably.
Yeah. I would say the only thing that I would add, and I have only been in a couple qualifiers in my day, but you better go in to the qualifier thinking that you are the greatest putter in the world. Like, this is not the time to be having any doubt sort of creep in. So whatever you need to do in terms of like prep leading up to that, so you feel like you're absolutely dialed, and visualizing those holes going center, the ball going in center cut, like give it the best shot and roll the dice and see what happens, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're going to have to make, 6 birdies, 7, 8 birdies. Yeah. I think about from the shooting low perspective, I don't do as well when I think like I have to shoot 66. I think about like being 1 under through 3. Like if I can just like somehow find a birdie in the first 3, and I generally know where that's going to be. Like tomorrow, I know where that would be. And then 2 under through 6. And I can kind of gives me some freedom to like not feel like I have to shoot 6 under, and like kind of break it up into smaller pieces has been helpful. Again, I don't necessarily think that way in a normal tournament, 36 holes. Maybe I should. But that has helped me in the past for sure. And I've heard other guys talk about that, like just break it up into like 3 or 6 hole segments.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I would say the only other thing on this topic, and then we can move on, is I think where you have some luxury to choose amongst sites, I think course prep can be a big advantage. Just that razor thin margin between maybe par and bogey on a hole and gaining strokes on the field, or maybe birdieing one of the tougher holes. I would say also like picking a course that is well suited towards your game. And I would say for the most part, if you're one of the better players, or you think you're one of the better players in the field, you probably want a very straightforward golf course, that's going to really speak to your skill level. If you are more of a long shot, you probably want one of those courses where there's a lot of score volatility, a lot of potential, a lot of pitfalls for things to go wrong. And if you're able to navigate those things, because it just happens to be your day, those are probably the ones that you should shoot for. I think about the U.S. Junior qualifier, especially just being an 18 hole, and it's just an absolute crapshoot, right? Even the best player at best is a coin flip, I think. I mean, I can tell you, frankly, like there's a qualifier up at Dornick Hills where we play it a lot. And there's a reason my son doesn't play at the qualifier at Dornick Hills, because there's just too much that can go wrong on any given hole. Like the Cliff hole was one of the greatest golf holes in the world, but you hit the ball over the green, it's out of bounds. You can make a triple on that hole. So easy, right? And it's just a good round, or being inside the number could quickly unwind. But if you're like one of those golfers we're talking about, a 76 shooter, everything might be clicking. You might avoid those pitfalls and get through. And that might be an awesome opportunity. So this is qualifier season. It's a little bit of an interlude relative to what we've been speaking about, but I think golfers sort of in this category, we're really hopeful and optimistic and encouraging you to enter these qualifiers. And hopefully these are some of the tips around getting, just the most out of them, whether you make it through or not. I think they are positive experiences, and hopefully this helps.
Yeah, the one, as you're saying all that, I was thinking about like some guys that I've coached that like they lived on the Monday Q tour, like they're just constantly Mondaying. There is no greater hell on earth than living on the Monday qualifying tour because you play such good golf that doesn't get rewarded. Like a majority of the time you're shooting 65 and it, like today, I think 7 under was in a playoff. It's like 7 under. That's really, really good. You know, and I think there was like 8 people at 7 under. So only like one of them got a spot. So if you don't make it through, that doesn't mean, I mean, you still played really, really well. That's the benefit of playing like 3 and 4 day events. If you're playing well, eventually that's going to like be rewarded, but it does serve a lot of value because unfortunately this is just reality of how like you get into stuff, whether it's AJGA stuff or up to the professional ranks. This is just how the world works. So unless you can earn status, like you've got to learn how to do this. So it's a skill that you should start early. I totally agree.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, best of luck, Andrew, tomorrow. And
yep, we'll see. Luckily, this won't air until after. I don't want too many people checking out the score. We can edit this out if I somehow shoot 66.
Yeah. The Driven Golf Podcast is produced by Joseph K. If you like this episode, like it, subscribe, pass it on to a friend who might be interested. It really helps us out a lot. We'll be back in a couple weeks with the next episode. Until then, remember, in this great game, the journey is the gift. Enjoy the journey.
The golf chat's back, dope podcast to stack. 2 jacks on wax with facts unmatched. Attach abstract stats, glad the mad stacks. Alas, no crack staff. Just 2 max laying tracks. Q is Jeff Shacks. No hacks, playing tracks front, line and back. Your brass tacks, college golf focus fat. Rap the impact, hashtag bat stash. Driven golf fans, it's time to assemble. Lead low with the flow, truly monumental. With beats so deep, feel it in your temple. Roll lines and goal line, Brentley Continental. Coincide with Romine, insights profound. The scraps of gold mine, dissect the round. This is what you found. Lower decks renowned. First tee rivalries, like rap battlegrounds. Driven golf fans, it's time to assemble. Be low with the flow, truly monumental. With beats so deep, feel it in your temple. Roll lines and gold line, Brentley Continental. Driven golf fans, it's time to assemble. Be low with the flow, truly monumental. With beats so